You guys set?
I'm starting this off with a very surprised but sad note. A few minutes ago, I was just handed an obituary of a longtime friend of ours who passed away yesterday, and probably a lot of you don't realize that, but Bill Long, who was for forever the official handicapper for the Riverside Park, United Stock Car Racing Club, Harvey Tattersall, etc. And Bill had attended a few of our own functions early in the season, and his son Bill Long has been Bill Long Jr. has been a big supporter of ours. But he passed away on January 27th. He had been in a nursing home in the Hartford, Connecticut area. So that's a sad note to start with, but I did think you want to know about it. I do have the obituary here if anybody wants any details. And I want to start the program by welcoming everyone here to our 8th annual New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame induction. We have instituted some new procedures and some new awards for today, and I just want you to know that we continue to update what we do. A lot of people go to work, put a lot of work into putting this presentation together, and for that information, why don't you just look at page 21 of your program book, and you'll be able to see all the people and all the different accomplishments that they've contributed to make this a success. But to start the event off, the first thing we're going to do while you're eating, they should be serving your food, your salads, etc. You can go right along and eat. Don't be embarrassed. We want to move along. At 2 o'clock, the formal presentation will start. We're going to start the induction of the veterans, and to do that, I'm going to ask R.A. Sylvia to step up here. He has, as you all know, is a well-known historian of the auto racing community. He knows the history of auto racing in New England all the way back to 1896, and he's going to induct the first 3 veterans inductees. R.A. Sylvia.
Thank you, Al. It's my pleasure to be up here again. Excuse my voice, my yearly cold. And just a brief word, the Veterans Committee consists of 3 of our more senior members, Bruce B. Cohen, Peter Zanardi, and myself. And we felt that the real early pioneers of this sport in New England deserve recognition. After all, the sport did not jump forth right after World War II. We had activity around here and famous people going back over 100 years. And this is the second time we've inducted strictly veterans committee has inducted 3 of the real early pioneers. The first gentleman we're going to induct today was a man named Harry Grant, which admittedly a couple of the members of the Veterans Committee had never heard of him, so I had to educate him. Harry Grant was a Boston boy, raced back in the early part of the century. He was a big, burly man, which you had to be to drive those vehicles back in those days with 4-inch wide tires, about 26 inches in diameter. The only power steering you had was a steering wheel about this big. Harry ran from the early 1900s up until 1915. And he kind of picked and chose his spots. He didn't follow the complete circuit. It seemed that as the spirit moved him, he'd go out and race. And he raced Indianapolis in 1911. And his most famous accomplishments were in the Alco automobile, which was made in Providence, Rhode Island, by the American Locomotive Company. And he won 2 years in succession the Vanderbilt Cup road race on Long Island in 1909 and 1910, prior to the Indianapolis 500. And at that time, this was the most prestigious race in the country. He ran other such venues as the Fairmount Park road races in Philadelphia, the Savannah, Georgia road races in Elgin, Illinois, On the West Coast, the Vanderbilt Cup at San Francisco. He ran the Corona, California road races. And closer to home, he ran the hill climbs in Worcester at Dead Horse Hill and the Lowell, Mass road races. And Harry was quite well in demand after his successful rides in the Alco. He managed to get rides in all the premier race cars of his day, the Loziers, the Isata, and he finished his careers in the Sunbeam automobile, which was an English car. Unfortunately, that vehicle led to him getting a ride in a good factory Maxwell, and he entered the inaugural race at the Sheepshead Bay, New York, 2-mile board track in 1915. And as the track was new, he went down with everybody else. They had several days of practice, and he crashed on the first day of practice and suffered burns which later proved fatal to Harry Grant. And he came back home to Boston to be buried. Again, he was kind of an enigmatic character, very low-keyed, but when he did get behind the wheel, he got the job done. The second veteran we're going to induct was a man whose career spanned both sides of World War II and every facet of racing. He started out driving midgets and sprint cars throughout the Northeast, gained quite a bit of success in that, was invited in 1938 to race in South America, in Argentina, with 25 or 30 of the greatest midget drivers in this country. They all went down on a steamship, an ocean liner, haul their cars and equipment down there. And while he didn't win a great deal of races, Oscar Cannonball Ridland we're speaking of, he was quite an operator, and was said when he brought his midget back to the United States, the car weighed twice as much as it did when it left, because it's rumored he had the tires stuffed full of gold that he somehow managed to obtain while he was in South America. Oscar was a character, he was an operator. I think George Pendergast went to the Oscar Ridland School of Racing. He was the first gentleman I ever bought personally a racing photo of back at the Ponta Delgada Stadium in North Tiverton, Rhode Island in 1946. I was so young, my mother had to write his name on it because I didn't even know how to write yet. And he was a colorful guy, always wore the big sheepskin collared World War II aviator's jacket. Did a lot of stunt driving with midgets with his cohort, Bob Blair. They would crash through flaming walls. Bob always got the position on the hood while Oscar drove blindfolded. And Oscar drove around all kinds of racetracks, blindfolded himself. He also gained fame as promoting the first midget race in New England after the war at the Topsfield Fairgrounds. And for some interesting details of that little stunt he pulled there, you really, if you don't already have it, you should get Lou Boyd's excellent book, Hot Cars and Cool Drivers. It has quite a few of Oscar's exploits on there, so suffice my repeating them, you should get yourself a copy if you don't already have one. Oscar ended up in the promoting game. He was in the Pine Speedway, which is in Lou's book, Hudson, New Hampshire, and also for a time, the Arundel Speedway. And he even tried a revival of the old Ponta Delgada in 1953. Where I first saw him. He departed this world in 1973, and one of our best characters was gone at that time. The third inductee is Arthur Red Bolduc, a Rhode Islander from Central Falls. At that time, he started racing in the late 40s. There were 5 to 10 gentlemen from that immediate area. They were all nicknamed Red. And I don't even remember if they all had red hair for whatever reason. They were all called Red. There was Red Hill from Massachusetts, Red Bolduc, Red Barbo, Red Bison, a whole bunch of guys. Red proved his talent early on in the stock cars and eventually drove his own cars and got a ride in Joe Davidson's, known as Goldbug's cars out of Attleboro, Mass. And these cars were quite scary. Freddie Lucchese once said he was afraid just to sit in these cars. Mr. Goldbug, he made them so light, he cut everything down, and it looked like the chassis had bent if you jumped on the frame rail. Well, Red wasn't afraid of him. He took him to many wins. And he eventually moved up to a real good car owned by Bertha Small of Rhode Island, primarily the number 23s. At that time, the cut downs were coming in, and Red drove one of Bertha's cars to many wins, primarily at Lonsdale and at Seekonk, and he drove for Port Perry at both Lonsdale and Seekonk, and at Norwood. When NASCAR came in, Red had Bertha build him a full coupe, and he was fully prepared to go with those, as he had dabbled with them a little bit on the United Circuit at Seekonk. Unfortunately, Red was just about in his prime till that fateful night in June of 1960 at the Norwood Arena when, for an unexplained reason, his Bertha Smalls cutdown took a sharp right coming out of the turn. And Red died several hours later. And with him died a tie to the immediate post-war racing drivers, the old guys that ran 6 and 7 nights a week and went everywhere with their stock cars and cutdowns. And I'd like to thank Mr. Cohen and Mr. Zanotti for their assistance in our conversations we had tossing this around, and I think we've already probably started on our next crop. And with that, I'd like to say that is this year's Veterans Committee inductees: Harry Grant of Boston, Cannonball Ridlin of Boston and New Hampshire, and Arthur Red Bolduc of Central Falls, Rhode Island. Thank you.
Next person I want to bring up is Bruce Cohen. He's going to introduce a new award for this year. Bruce Cohen, Lou Boyd, and Dick Berggren, all well known to probably everybody in this room, had their first success is forming a group called Inc., I-N-K, Inc., Incorporated, I-N-C, and they promoted the very first Spring Sizzler, and they decided, and they came to the board of directors of the NEAR and said that they wanted to recognize people in media, so they actually created, and this is not this award is not from NEAR, but it's certainly endorsed and sponsored by NEAR. But I want to bring up Bruce Cohen to present the Jack Rada Media Awards.
Thank you, Al, and fellow racers and member of NEAR. And on behalf of Inc. Incorporated, I want to present a few awards. I'll be very brief. Way back when, 30, 40 years ago, a lot of us used to complain that we never get any publicity. The only publicity that racing ever got when there was a fatal accident somewhere, whether it was unfortunately locally or throughout the country. Way back then, there was at least one local shining beacon who covered racing in a very positive way, and that is Mr. Sam Weisberg, who wrote for many years for the Lowell Sun. Sam grew up in the Drake, Massachusetts area, next to the famous midget racing driver Hermie Delisle. He also grew up right down the street from Alex Benoit, who also raced and built and promoted the Lake Drake Speedway. He became a race fan, and even to this day, he's a race fan. The Lowell Sun asked him to write a column and to cover some races, which he did. And this was a very pioneering effort. Sam wrote a weekly column from 1962 through almost through the end of 1979. And this was in an era when racing never got much coverage at all. In fact, he told me the first article that he wrote, the first column, was about Smokey Boutwell, who's being inducted today. He also was a friend of and covered many races driven by Hall of Fame member, the late Johnny Thompson. I think the racing community owes people like Sam Weisberg, who are really pioneers in covering the sport in a very positive way, just a note of thanks. Could Sam please stand up? There's Sam Weisberg over in the corner, a true friend of automobile racing. Sam, would you come up so we could give you your trophy, please? While Sam is coming up, the next person who's going to receive the Inc. Incorporated Journalism Achievement Award is someone that at times we'd like to shoot him, and times we'd like to kiss him. And Sam, thank you.
Okay, cool.
And it's none other than our own Val Lasser. Could Val stand up, please? Back in the early 70s, for those who raced at Lakeville Speedway, including track champion John Kershaw, who's with us today, there was on the pit shack, there was a little bin where there was something called pit grit. And the late Phil Harris would have all the news printed out in this little sheet. and you could find out everything going on at Lakeville. Well, Phil, who's now deceased, teamed up with a guy running the Sports Weekly newspaper, a fellow named Val Lasser. And Val started New England Speedway Scene. And before the era of the internet and all this other communication, Val was a beacon in the dark. For many years, Val's paper was the means of communication. How many of us on Thursday started looking for the paper to see what Tootie would write, to see what Bonesy would write, to see what editorial Val would write? And you know, Val's taken a lot of knocks. He's had his good times and his bad times, but you know what? The paper still comes out every week, and many of us look forward to it. So on behalf of Inc. Incorporated, the racing community, and NEAR, I'd like to call Val Lasser up here.
I don't have to talk too much because you guys want to eat, but Al told me that I had 3 hours that I could talk. So we'll just let it shot, and I'd like to really thank, it was all the great writers and photographers that have been in the pages of Speedway Scene for these past, we went over 1,700 weeks with consecutive until finally we go 50 times a week. It's getting tougher now. The post office is getting kind of shaky, but we still get out every week. If you don't get it on time, call up and harass us, be on the list. It's been great going around with guys like Bugsy. And Bugsy, you better get out of here early. The Undertaker wants that suit. He's got a live one there that he's got to put up. Cohen's here. He's waiting for give me this cup. I might need it to drink out of. They forgot to put a glass over my table. So we'll be shot. Again, we thank all of the fans, the racers. They're the ones that have really made Speedway Scene. My family, my young honey over there that keeps me straight. And let's all have a good time, and we honor these guys that we're having after you finish eating. Thank you.
How many people, is this the first time you've ever been here at the NEAR Hall of Fame banquet? Well, we have a lot of first-timers. You're in for a treat because this is a very special day, a very simple ceremony. We're not going to get complicated like talking about the Jack Tan engine because that would take us all day. Instead, we're going to talk about some legends, and that might take us all day too, but for a good reason. This isn't about technical things, it's about legendary racetracks, places like Plainville Stadium and Star Speedway and Thunder Road and the Eastern States Coliseum. But mainly, it's about special drivers and their stories. So it's very simple, and I think you'll really enjoy it today because we're going to turn back the clock. But we're going to start by turning the clock back only a few minutes back into the fall of 2004 when a driver from Cherryfield, Maine became only the second person in history to win 3 Busch North championships. And we have started a new category this year, the New England Driver of the Year, as we try to link the present with the past. And we think we have an excellent person to be our first New England Driver of the Year. To make the presentation, a man who covers auto sports, auto racing for the Hartford Courant. And if you want to know anything about the local auto racing, you have to read his column every Friday during the racing season because that's how you know all the scuttlebutt. So to make the presentation from the Hartford Courant, Sean Corshane.
Thank you, Matt. My pleasure to be here today and to get to meet a lot of new faces and a a lot of people I see around the tracks every week. This is a great ceremony and something NEAR should be commended for doing each year. The annual honoring of drivers that have dedicated and given so much of their lives to auto racing in New England is an act that helps keep the history of the sport alive. As the big shots at the top of NASCAR have shown in recent years, history can sometimes take a back seat in an ever speedier race to move the sport further and further ahead. All you got to do is ask the season ticket holders at North Carolina Speedway what history means to NASCAR, or ask the fans who annually went to Darlington on Labor Day weekend how they think NASCAR's remembrance of the history of the sport. And it's not just NASCAR that has left the past a few laps down, but it's also the new breed of fan that have come on, the Jeff Gordon era fan who wouldn't know a midget from a modified. I once walked around a garage at Pocono Speedway with Bobby Allison for about 15 minutes, and walking along, nobody stopped him, nobody asked him for an autograph, and 84 career victories at the top level in NASCAR, and it was like nobody knew who he was. And at the same time as we're walking along, Kenny Wallace is walking along, and he's got a throng of fans behind him, and behind him was Casey Mears with a bunch of people chasing him. And between them, they have no wins, and yet nobody batted an eye at Bobby Allison. And that's why it's so important that NEAR continues each year to honor the individuals that help racing in New England to thrive for so long. It's an insurance policy that keeps the history alive. And it's because of those individuals today that racing in New England is as strong as it is. The dedications of those honored by NEAR today and in the past have ensured that grassroots racing in New England continues to thrive. And here in New England, we're blessed with an abundance of great racing facilities, a wonderful variety of different racing divisions, and tons of talented drivers. This year, for the first time, NEAR honors greatness and achievement in the present with the awarding of the New England Driver of the Year. Undoubtedly, the day will come when the driver being celebrated with that honor today will return to this ceremony to most likely be inducted into the NEAR Hall of Fame. But today we honor him for his achievements during the 2004 racing season. In 2004, this driver not only continued his streak of championships in the Busch North Series to 3 straight, but he did it in dominating fashion, winning 5 of the 13 events and finishing in the top 10 in all but 1 race. And all the while, he continued to prove as a great ambassador for the sport. So it's with my great pleasure on behalf of NEAR to award Andy Santerre of Cherryfield, Maine with the first NEAR New England Driver of the Year award.
Honor for me to receive this award and to be here in New England. Obviously, coming from the state of Maine, anytime I can get up here and see all you folks, it's just awesome for me. And to be in the same room with so many of you drivers that are in the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame, people that I've never got to meet, that I've heard so much about, just Bugsy Stevens for one. I mean, I never got to meet Bugsy, so today's a big day for me just to be in his presence. There's so many great drivers here. You know, Beaver Dragon called me. I didn't know what Beaver was calling me for. I do know Beaver and have had the opportunity to race with him. And when he called me and told me about this, I was just, it was great just to talk to him. So I have been able to race with him, Stub Fadden, Dick McCabe, a lot of the guys that have been inducted. So, you know, I've just been fortunate to be around good people my whole career. I guess being in this room, I'm a young driver, but out in the real world now, the drivers are half my age. So I didn't start racing until I was 19 years old, and it seems like some of these kids that are going into the Cup Series now are 18, 19 years old. So it's just amazing how it's evolved over the years. But I've had a great career, been, again, just surrounded myself with good people. I want to thank Joe and Nancy Bessie. They've been my car owners the last 2 years. Obashan Hardware, Castle Chemical, the folks that pay the bills for us, give us the money to race and do what we love to do. And I want to thank my wife, Sue, who's with me today. She supports my racing. Obviously, everybody here knows that without a supportive wife, it wouldn't be a whole lot of fun. So she's just as excited. And when I have nights when I come home and want to quit and forget about it and get a regular job, she's the one that tells me I need to stick it out. So we've had a few of those nights too. So it's, I guess, me being a driver, I enjoy driving. You know, obviously I wouldn't do it, but for me, just to be involved with the sport, being around all the fine people that you see at the racetracks, from the race fans to the media to the photographers, the Busch North Series that we run on, it just seems like it's such a family sport, and that's what I enjoy the most about it. We get to go back to racetracks every year that I see fans that I've seen for the last 10 years. So it's just, I don't know how to explain it. It's just, to me, I can't think of anything I'd rather be doing right now. And I grew up in Cherryfield, Maine. It's a town of about 1,000 people. And we had a racetrack right beside my dad's home there. It was a dirt track. And Lou and I were talking earlier, and I didn't figure I'd ever meet anybody that had raced at the Cherryfield Fairgrounds outside the local area. And Lou had told me today that he'd raced there, so that was pretty interesting for me. So my dad raced there, and growing up as a kid, we had a junkyard behind my house, and my dad did that at nights and weekends, just sold old junk parts and whatnot, and that's how I got enough money to race as a teenager. I sold a bunch of car parts and everything, but just tell you a quick story. Kids used to get off the school bus at my house because my dad always towed cars in, and when people wouldn't come get them, they were just old junkers, and all the kids would come by, and I'd say, hey, let's take a car out back and go around the racetrack. So I had an old Chrysler station wagon that would hold 9 of us. So being in 6th or 7th grade, all the kids wanted to come to my house. So we'd go up there and race around the track, and I'd be coming down through the road that went to the racetrack. It was about a mile to get up into the woods, or half a mile, and I'd sling that thing sideways in and out. It was all dirt. And once in a while, my dad would pop out of the woods, and he'd give me the old evil eye and the handshake. He didn't want anybody getting hurt up there, obviously, but we didn't strap in. We didn't have helmets. Didn't do anything. So we just went up there and see how fast we could go around that old half-a-mile dirt track. But the track's all grown up now. You couldn't get around there with a four-wheeler at this point. It's grown up so bad. But it was real cool for me to hear Lou say he'd been around there and seen it. So that was where I grew up and had the racing bug from day one. So I guess I'd have to thank my parents, Louie and Jesse Santerre, and they've been supportive of me pretty much all my career. I think they didn't influence me to get into racing because my dad knew what it cost to do it, and I think he didn't figure that a kid growing up in Cherryfield, Maine would ever make a living doing it. So when I started at Speedway 95 in Bangor, I think they both thought I was kind of crazy. I went to the bank and took out a loan to buy a race car. And luckily, my uncle was the bank manager, so that worked out in my favor. I borrowed $5,000. It took me 3 years to pay the race car off, and I probably spent $30,000 racing it, but I ended up getting it anyway. So I had a great career. For me to win 3 championships in the Bush North, it's just it's been amazing. And again, it's the people that you surround yourself with. I've got a great bunch of guys, great bunch of sponsors, and everything's kind of fallen in place for me. It hasn't been easy. I've been on the roller coaster, as most of you racers know. It's one year you're on top, the next year you might be on the bottom. So I take it one year at a time, and I do the best I can do. And I really enjoy working on the car as much as I do driving it. So hopefully I'll always have a place in this sport. And hopefully I'll get invited back here. I don't know if this award's going to be, if I have a shot at winning it again, but I'm proud to say that next year it looks like I will be driving full-time again. There was a question mark there, but right now my current owners, Steve and Peg Griswold, that own Grisco Racing, have told me that they want me to run full-time. We don't have a sponsor right now. We are looking, but Finney for getting me up here. He brought my wife Sue and I up, and I appreciate you having us. And this is just a great award. I'll treasure it forever, that's for sure. So thank you all.
We're ready now to meet the class of 2005, but first, we have to, like any time before you go racing, you have to put fuel in the race car. And who better to do that to us than John Holland of Sunoco Race Fuels. So, John, we're going to ask you to come up to make a special presentation.
Congratulations to all the nominees this year and Andy on that award. It's a great award. He's a very accomplished driver and very rewardful of that honor, I guess. Anyways, we've been doing this a lot of years, handing out a check to help the Near Hall of Fame. I know it's a good business thing to do. It's the right thing to do, but I'll tell you, Mike and I are fans, and I see the people that passed away this last year, and I think of Dick Watson, and those are the real reasons we do it. Dick Watson won a lot of races in my backyard over the years. He probably doesn't know it, but on behalf of New England Racing Fuel, I'd like to present Al Feeney in the Near Hall of Fame a check to help them run their show for another year. Thank you.
I want to personally thank John, and of course, when he speaks of Mike, he speaks of Mike Joy, his partner in the Sunoco distributing motor fuels situation. As you all know, Mike's lead announcer for the Fox TV broadcasting. And Mike has been our MC for the past 7 years. This year, the Fox schedule and all his work on Speed Vision prevented him from coming up from North Carolina to be with us. But we always, Mike is our #1 guy, and we appreciate everything we've done. This is the 7th check that the Sunoco Fuel Company has given us. Now, I'm not sure how much it is, but based on what they have given us in the first 6 years, we've received over $6,000 in donations from the Sunoco Fuel Company. So I really want to thank them all and everything for all they've done. And I understand Lou Boyd wants to come up and say a few words.
So, speaking about fuel, I got to tell you about this. You know, it's been kind of a rough year since the last Hall of Fame. Think about what's happened. Over 100,000 Iraqis dead, 1,300 Americans, continuing genocide in the Sudan, the tsunami. And you know, all of that on top of some things about our society that we talked about at the Near Awards banquet a little bit that aren't really all that good. How about this dude, Donald Trump? We talked about him a little bit. He's the guy who just got married a week ago. Remember all that lavishness, all that expense, and we make a celebrity out of him? Well, hello, isn't that the same Donald Trump who went bankrupt in the fall with a whole line of hotels and casinos and literally screwed his creditors all over the country? Don't you get tired of it? Maybe it's the time of the year. But you know something? What always can brighten us up are some random acts of kindness. And let me tell you a story about that. In 1965, I was doing a little bit of PR work for Wally Faulkner down at Thompson Speedway, trying to get my way through school and really, more fundamentally, trying to keep my B car on the track. Well, one night, Wally came over and said, "Hey, Lou, will you go give the trophy tonight to the winner?" And the winner was Dick Watson, the mighty Dick Watson in the equally mighty V4 Mystic missile, Bob Garbarino's car. And they just won the Trenton qualifier. I was petrified. The idea of going up and talking to a driver like that just had me shaken, but off I went. Well, as soon as I got there, Dick Watson, in a move that I'll never forget, put his hand around my shoulder and he said, "Lou, thanks a lot for bringing that trophy over here, and I tell you what, I think you ought to be part of our pit crew down in Trenton so you can see how well we represent this track." Well, I'll tell you something, that did wonders for my self-confidence, and I became a Dick Watson fan forever. 2 years ago, in the fall, Linda Watson got a call from Dick, and he sounded a little strange. He said, "You better come home for lunch." And she thought to herself, "Yeah, I think I better." When she got there, she was really surprised to see Dick in tears. The reason he was weeping is that he had just found out that his friends and fans had got him inducted into the Near Hall of Fame. And he said to Linda, "This is the greatest accomplishment of my life." Then this last fall, as all of you know, Dick was pretty darn sick, and he had a lot of time to contemplate his passing. And along the way, he told Linda that he wanted to make a major donation to Near. And she's here today, and she says that she will continue forever the importance of this organization to Dick. Dick went on to tell her, "This is not to be a memoriam to me. This is to be a celebration of Near." Well, I think that's pretty darn worth celebrating. I think we've got a good selection committee. We can not only pick great race car drivers, but we can pick heroes, people who do things for other than just themselves. So when Al Feeney comes up to accept this check, I'm going to ask Linda Watson to stand up and give a wave so we can give her the applause she deserves. Linda.
Now, I think we're taking, with all these drivers today looking for sponsorship, maybe we're taking a little bit of a risk to make our first Hall of Fame presenter a bank president. But Ken Smith is going to be making our first presentation. He's a president of the Pentucket Bank, but more importantly, his roots in racing go back years. He was a driver for years. He was a general manager of NESMA, which was a super modified organization that raced in tracks all over New England. And he and Russ Conway helped found the Yankee Racing League, and it's amazing how Hall of Famers get intertwined and stuff. That was the Yankee Racing League was captured for back-to-back years by Dick Armstrong, one of our Hall of Fame members who will be inducted today. So to induct Smokey Boutwell into the Hall of Fame, here is Ken Smith.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, I have made a few loans in my life to race drivers and car owners, and let me tell you one thing. Every single one that I made was paid back, whether they went bankrupt or not, because the racing people are real down-to-earth people, and that's why I am still as happy as it could be to be involved in racing. Just a great bunch of people. Now for the prepared remarks. It's so nice to see all of you dedicated members of our auto racing family here today to honor the 2005 inductees into the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame. You know what? It's because of you that this event takes place. And I encourage you to spread the word and never, never give up your interest as well as your support of these kind of events. After all, it was because of you that we have this wonderful history, and you should be quite proud of the contributions each of you have made to our sport and the warm memories that we have been sharing here today. I and so many others sincerely appreciate everything you did. I know it was a lot of hard work, a lot of long hours, very little financial reward, if any, and many difficult sacrifices which you had to make along the way. But it was so very, very special, even though we didn't know how very special it was at the time we were doing it. It was exciting and it was enjoyable, especially when we did well. We might have won a heat, even a feature race, a few of us. I tried it for a couple of years. I finished second to Bentley one time. That was my best on the track. I decided it was time to go back into the box office. Maybe I could do something better with some cash instead of trying to drive a race car. And one more thing. I doubt that I would be standing here today if I had not grown up near the Pine Speedway in Groveland, Mass, way back in the 40s and the 50s. Well, anyway, here I am, and I'm thrilled that I was asked to have the honor of reminding you about the many accomplishments of one of this year's inductees into the Hall of Fame. He was certainly one of the most talented drivers, and without doubt, one of the all-time greats of the 50s and the 60s. Let's hear it one more time from the gentleman racer from Pelham, New Hampshire, Nate Smokey Boutwell. Thank you so much for your attention. It won't be much longer. Today they call Tony Stewart Smoke, but in my book, Nate Boutwell was the original Smoke. And if you measure success by race wins, then the original Smokey, the one with the Y on the end, and over 200 feature event victories, comes out far ahead. I'm sure that many of you here today that either raced against Nate or watched him compete will agree with that statement. I cannot do Smokey's fantastic racing career justice in the next couple of minutes, but I will try to give you a glimpse of some of his many, many achievements. Nate Boutwell was born into a large family in the tiny town of Pelham, New Hampshire in the early 30s. He lost his dad when he was only 5 years old. When he was of age, he joined the Marines, In the Marines, he was assigned to the motor pool and began honing his skills as a welder and a precision driver. He was sent overseas to Korea, and because of his driving talent, designated as the personal driver for a high-ranking colonel. Although unconfirmed, it was said that Nate had the fastest hopped-up Jeep in the motor pool, and he was undefeated in the Korean Mud Bowl races during his tour of duty. Couldn't prove that fact, but that's what I understand. Upon returning to the States, he and a couple of Marine buddies went to a sprint car race at a muddy dirt track down in the Carolinas. Announcement was made that a car owner was looking for an experienced driver. Well, Nate's buddies went to the car owner and told him that Nate had plenty of experience and was a real good wheelman, especially on muddy tracks. Of course, they failed to tell the car owner that this experience came in Korea driving one of those Jeeps. Anyways, Nate got into the sprint car, drove it quite well, and finished the race. No, he didn't win. But that's all it took to hook him on the racing bug that he never fully got out of his system. Once out of the service, he returned to Pelham and got hooked up with his soon-to-be brother-in-law, Bobby Edwards, who was building a car for the Manchester, Hudson, and Pines URDC circuit. It was during this period that he acquired the nickname Smokey. How? Well, Nate always had a cigarette or a cigar burning while working on his stock car in the tiny basement of Bobby Edwards' home. One night, Bobby looked up at all the smoke hovering around the car and said, "Nate, I think you're going to smoke 'em this weekend." Well, he did smoke 'em that weekend, and the name Smoke with a Y on the end stuck, and everyone began to call him Smokey. And he did indeed smoke the competition for the next 16 years or so. Here are some of the cars he campaigned around many of the New England and New York tracks. In 1954, he built his own number 401 Ford Coupe. He jumped from that car into the 26 of Johnny Duggan. That ride earned him the opportunity to drive the number 23 and occasionally the number 24. It was an open cockpit, big car, on the dirt at Essex Junction, Vermont, over in Keene, New Hampshire, and Claremont, New Hampshire, all dirt tracks. Having achieved quite a bit of early success, he began to drive the number 11 of Paul Abbott, and then into the Flying 5 of Ed Bowley. In fact, Bowley prepared a midget that Smokey drove from time to time during the 1958 season. Smokey then moved on to the number 8 and the M8, owned by Rocky Hinton, and he also drove the 24 of Junior Prescott before getting back together with the Duggan brothers, driving the radical and unbeatable 1/3 rail car. And that was quite a machine. After another winning season with Ed Bowley, he hooked up with Jack Arute and the Garuti brothers in 1965, driving the potent number 14 and 28 for the next 5 full seasons. Let me quote from an article on Smokey that appeared 47 years ago in the Lowell Sun, written by another one of today's deserving inductees, Sammy Weisberg. Sam, I'm going to give you the article afterwards and remind you of what you wrote in 1958. But here's what you had to say about Smokey. Smokey is one of the most versatile drivers in the sport. He has already wheeled just about every type of speedway car: midgets, big cars, stock cars, late model stocks, and has even participated in a number of motorcycle hill climbing events. The Pelham driver had a banner season in 1956 when he won 37 feature events in the stock cars. He has driven at about every track, dirt or asphalt, in New England, end quote. And as the song says, it had only just begun. A few of the highlights from Smokey's sensational career include the 1955 and 56 Pines and Hudson Speedway champion, 1957, the Norwood Modified champion, 1957, he was the Westboro Speedway champion, 1959, the Atlantic Auto Racing champion at the West Peabody Speedway. In 1959, he was elected to the Oilsome Hall of Fame. and in 1959, winner of the Canadian American International Classic at Dover, New Hampshire Speedway. A race that Smokey always talked about and was quite proud of. In 1960, he won the Empire State 250 lap at Menands, New York Speedway. He nosed out Ernie Gahan, Pete Corey, Rini Charland, and Red Foot for that big win. In 1960, he finished as the runner-up to the season champion at Westboro. 1961, one of the biggest events in his life occurred when wife Judy gave birth to twins, daughter Patty and son Lee. Leave it to Smokey. One wasn't enough. He had to double up. 1962, he was a runner-up to the champion at the Norwood Arena. 1963, he won 21 feature events at the Pines, Hudson, Westboro, and Dover, driving that fantastic rail car, sponsored by Wilmington Ford. Smokey was always very partial to Ford power. In 1964, him and Rocky Hinton took a little ride down to Daytona. They finished 20th in the Daytona 500, and they ran 14th in the 100-lap qualifying race. Actually, the year before, they went to Daytona, but they wouldn't allow the car to run. And I personally had some experience when we used to take cars, back in those days, down to the south to run. The Southerners didn't like the Yankees coming down, especially if the car looked like it might go. So they usually found a way of stopping you from racing. But in '64, he did drive a Ford, and he did quite well, finishing 20th. Yeah, at the end of '64, he jumped into the number 24 of Junior Prescott at Norwood Arena, and he nosed out. You know who he nosed out in 1964, right near the end of the season? It was Pete Hamilton. And in 1964, his second biggest event of his life occurred when wife Judy did it again, and Nate Jr. was born. A couple other little notes. In 1969, he won the 150-lap Fall Classic at Stafford Speedway. In 1969, he was also the Stafford Speedway champion, and that year he finished third at Thompson. Smokey then retired his trademark red shirt, bright red driving suit, and his not-so-famous Hush Puppy driving shoes at the end of the 1969 season to spend more time with Judy and the kids. In retirement, Smokey took up flying airplanes, running a small welding shop, and politics, serving as a selectman in his hometown of Pelham, New Hampshire, until a heart condition slowed him down. A couple of weeks ago, I paid a visit to Nate Jr. at his small welding shop in Pelham, New Hampshire. He certainly was a chip off the old big block, because he too displayed the natural driving talent of Dad by winning 2 season championships in the ultra-fast super-modified division at both the Star and the Lee Speedways in the early 90s. A couple of things Junior said to me as we did some bench racing next to the hot stove for a couple of hours in his shop. It was really neat growing up in a town where everybody seemed to know and respect your dad, and even Mom too. Also, Junior told me that when his dad watched him race, his dad was so nervous that he would close his eyes and start eating his nitro pills. Unfortunately, Smokey and Judy passed away more than a decade ago. And shortly thereafter, Nate Jr. hung up his championship helmet in retirement. Junior told me that he often thinks and really misses those Sunday morning breakfasts with his family when the major focus of the conversation was what happened at the races the night before. Didn't we all enjoy that experience at one time or another? I know the answer is yes. Now, if I would please have Smokey's sons, Lee, Nate Jr., along with Ray Gendron, a longtime and close friend, to come forward, and I want to present him with the Hall of Fame trophy. Right down here in front, boys. Let's hear it, Smokey Bartwell.
Thanks, Ken Smith. That was wonderful. I had a good time chatting with you.
the other day in front of the wood stove there, looking back at one of the pictures that of my father, his famous red T-shirt fire suit had to be converted over. They changed the rules, and you had to have a fire suit, a genuine fire suit. And so when I started getting involved in racing, I asked my father, "Dad, do you think I could borrow your fire suit?" And his words were, "Whatever you do, don't get next to any fire with that thing, or you'll be in trouble." But I could go on and on for a long time here, telling great stories about a wonderful father and great parents that I had. My family has been fantastic, supportive of my father and my racing career. And I'd like to thank the NEAR organization for the great work they've done. My family will honor this for a long time. Thank you very much.
Now for our next presentation, we're going to bring back Lou Boyd of Coastal 181. You know, if you can't watch the races on TV or you can't go to a banquet like this, the next best thing is to read about it. And Lou is responsible for a lot of books, and one that I recommend is Hot Cars, Cool Drivers. I keep on getting them mixed up, but recommended reading, and now we're going to meet him, Lou Boyd.
Thank you, Matt. You know, it's really funny. I'm so conscious of saying the same thing up here each year, but damn it, I'm going to say it again. To hell with Charlotte, and to hell with Indianapolis. You know something? We got the greatest racers right here in the Northeast. No doubt about it. And thank you so much. Al Feeney, Danny Party, R.A. Sylvia, Pete Zanardi, everybody who worked so hard to put this banquet on. You know something? Thinking back about it, back in the spring of 1964, the Falcone family must have been awful busy. They'd just taken over the promotional reins at Westboro Speedway, and they completely revamped the divisions that were running there. And not only that, they had the championship car themselves, and they'd won the year before. But in '64, they were in trouble. Their driver, the masterful Fred Borden, had taken on an assignment to build a barge up on Lake Winnipesaukee, so they had no driver. So what happened is that John Falcone, the patriarch of the family, told the kids who were running the race car, "No big problem, just call Fitchburg, call the Flying Finn." Well, the kids did that, and they called the Finn, and the Finn listened to what they had to say, and he said, "Okay, I'll come down to Westboro and I'll drive your car, but I want you to know something. I hurt my hand pretty badly, so I want you to put one of those girly knobs on it." Well, on opening day, 1964, into the pits came probably 25 flathead modifieds, including the gleaming number 10 Falcone Brothers car, complete with a suicide knob on the steering wheel for the Finn. The Finn went out and took about a half a lap to build a relationship with his new car. He went upstairs immediately. And in the feature, he put on one of the most unbelievably electric feature races in the history of Westboro Speedway. For 20 laps, he battled outside the all-time popular, all-American boy, Pete Salvador, who was aboard the Bouchard red and white number 2. They were far beyond the zone, bouncing each other, bouncing the fence. And when finally the race was over and the Finn took the checkered, hundreds of fans were looking around saying, "Who was that guy?" Well, that guy was the Flying Finn from Fitchburg, Reno Tolonen, New England's greatest racing driver that New England never knew about. And one of the reasons that Reno's career was so unheralded is that he's just plain shy, modest, a man of few words. What's all this excitement about, he thinks. Another reason is that the guy could just drive anything, and so he did. Every season he seemed to be off doing something else, so the fans really couldn't get used to him as a regular. It started in those thundering big cars, and he soon went to the AAA, where he had as good a record as almost anybody in New England. Then it was to the Jalopies, when in 1951, one year, he won 4 championships alone. Couldn't quite get rid of the open wheel stuff, though. So he kept his hand in the midgets and spent a lot of time aboard a really cool midget called the Whisperer with an Evinrude motor, one that sits still in his garage today. But you know, looking back at it, I think that if Reno is known most for any particular division, it would be the cut-downs, particularly at that neat moment that they were beginning to morph into the super modifieds. And Reno's last cut-down was really something. That orange number 732, low slung, wildly offset, a rocket ship. But what it was not was a testimony to advanced planning. You see, Reno built it in an unheated chicken coop outside his kitchen, and he had to run an extension cord out there to bring power to himself all winter. But in the springtime, when he got it all done, he found that he had to knock the side of the building down to get it out. Well, no problem, it's worth it. He won the first night at Seekonk. And he won the 64 championship for the Falcones. And after that, he built a couple of NASCAR modifieds and went down to Norwood and Thompson. But those were the years that it was becoming very, very difficult for an independent owner-driver to keep going. Other near members, such as Dick Armstrong, were really raising the bar financially. Reno was still fast, but he was kind of tough to watch. Listen to what Pete Fiandaca said. He went down to watch Reno run the Thompson 500 in 1969, and he was all excited when his hero qualified up front and ran a couple of hundred laps. And when Reno pulled out, Peter went running over the car saying, Reno, what's the matter? Reno climbed out, said nothing. I just can't afford to buy any more fuel. Yeah, you know, Reno Talonen, you thrilled us at another time. You thrilled us at a time before drivers needed to have PR agents, at a time that there weren't that many financial yuppies in racing, a time when what was really important was who could get into the turn the fastest. And you could do that, Reno. There's no doubt about it. But if you've learned anything about Reno Talonen from what I've said, you can hear that he always did things the hard way, and today's no exception. On the way to this Hall of Fame, he decided to go to the hospital and have just this little operation, an aortic aneurysm, one of the most massive surgeries that you can have. But here he is with us today. So let's give him a little bit of extra time to come up to the podium, and as he does, let's recognize the one and only Flying Finn. We're going to go ahead and give Reno the plaque, and he asked that we bypass his acceptance, but he's going to be more than happy to see all of you and go over and tap his shoulder. He's one good guy.
On behalf of all the members of NEAR, it's my pleasure to give you your own special NEAR Hall of Fame jacket. Hope you wear it proudly. You're also getting a complimentary T-shirt, and that yellow card is your lifetime membership in the NEAR Hall of Fame.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
We've met legendary drivers. Now it's time to meet another legendary journalist, a man with more than 30 years in the business at papers such as the Hartford Times and New Haven Register, and more importantly, he was one of the first daily newspaper writers to ever really take an interest in the sport of auto racing, and he's also taken a big interest in this Hall of Fame dinner, so it's my pleasure to bring up to the podium Pete Zanardi.
One of the nice things about dealing with midgets, they don't get mad at you when you're really quick, so pay attention. My good friend sitting back there, Pete Vanderveer, apparently unafraid of giving away his age, was telling me that after 40 years of watching this sport, the best midget race he ever saw is still a Joe Chicky Dutch Schaefer battle at Seekonk back in the 1960s. Well, if Pete can give away his age, I can give away mine. I'm older. I saw Chicky drive a stock car. but I also happy to tell you I saw him work his magic in a midget. I regret now, after all these years trying to be a writer, that I never got the chance to talk to him, because I think journalistically he would have been quite a challenge. But I do know Joe Chicky, because in the 70s, those NEMA guys sort of gave me a home. Hanging around with those guys, I learned this about Joe Chicky. That man was deity then. He was something special. And I kind of think it's unfortunate that the Northeastern Midget Association isn't better represented here tonight, because Chicky put a face on that club that it still boasts about. It is still one of the most progressive open cockpit sanctioning bodies in the United States. Few people have changed their sport the way Joe Chicky did in an all too short career. As hackneyed as this may sound, we induct into this Hall of Fame tonight a guy who was a racer from head to toe, a driver, an owner, a builder extraordinaire, a blue-collar, dirty hands racer, and a quiet revolutionary. The program pretty much tells you what Joe Chicky accomplished, but there is one sentence that absolutely screams over the past 40 years. In 1966, he became the first driver to win an ARDC championship in something other than an Offenhauser-powered car. You know, it's a damn good thing we're finally hearing those screams. And of course, it was Falcon. The Falcon, Chicky, Falcon. The wash of history kind of puts those things together. But the story is Joe Chicky. He won his first race at Plainville in 1961, and I'm almost positive it was in a Ford Ferguson-powered car. But the NEMA titles he won in 62, 63, and 65 came with the Falcon motor. Go find somebody from that era, and the romance and the feeling they have for Chicky is still there. Of course, he took that Falcon to the older, more conservative ARDC and trimmed their tails as well. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy then. It wasn't easy at all breaking into that top echelon of the midgets, into the Schaefers, into the Duncans, into the... Those guys were something. But Joe Chicky, he did this on a magic carpet, conceived in his own mind, constructed with his own hands, and driven with his own right foot. I can't think of any greater accolade or any more reason that Joe Chicky should be a member of this Hall of Fame. Stephen Chicky, you want to come up here and accept this award for your dad?
I'm going to keep this pretty short because I'm not too good of a speaker in front of a lot of people. I'd like to thank my lovely wife, Lisa, and my stepfather, William Hipsky, for being here with me today. And most of all, Near, for turning me on to this Antique Racers Foundation, which I didn't know about until a couple of years ago. And most of all, for you guys and the board for inducting my father, Joe Chicky, into the Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Now, a lot of people think that the racing season doesn't start until next weekend with the Rolex 24 at Daytona. But in reality, the racing season actually started last night, the Bustier 10-hour marathon. As our next presenter was in Buffalo, New York last night to make a presentation there at a dinner. He drove all night, finally got to East Windsor at 10 a.m. this morning, and we're happy that he made the trip because, in my opinion, the best journalist in motorsports today is from New England, from right down the road in Southington, Connecticut. He's written many outstanding books. His Bugsy Stevens book, you open the pages, it's almost, you can smell the gas fumes. That's what a great job. And his Richie Evans book is great. You can read him every month in Dick Berggren's Speedway Illustrated, where he's a columnist. So I guess there's nothing more to say than, here's Bones.
Thank you, Matt. I thought he said I was a communist. Columnist. I consider myself lucky to to have been part of these Hall of Fame ceremonies since the very first one back in 1998. I feel even more fortunate to have been asked to present several Hall of Fame members for their induction, including the man I'm here to talk about today, the great Don Collins. But this one is a little bit different for me because I was never lucky enough to see Don Collins do what it was that made him such a legend. Whenever I've stood here in the past, it was to pay tribute to somebody I'd been lucky enough to watch in person. Sadly for me, I came along a little too late to see Mr. Collins in his role as Grand Master of the Waterford Speed Bowl. I never got to know him in eyewitness form as Don Collins, the race driver. In a strange way, however, this only added to my appreciation of him. Through my love of history and through the words of others, I came to know him as Don Collins, the icon, Don Collins, the Speed Bowl king, Don Collins, who was so damn good that to this day, whenever you talk to a Waterford old-timer about any of that track's big winners, from Charlie Webster to Bob Potter, who's here today, sooner or later you're guaranteed to hear this: yeah, but you should have seen Collins. When you stop to consider that Don Collins hasn't raced in 35 years and is rarely seen at a racing-related event, this is an extraordinary compliment to a man who is clearly an extraordinary champion. And yet Collins remains a bit of a mystery man to a lot of folks from my generation. That's mostly because once he retired from racing, Collins pretty much did a vanishing act. By the way, this was a champion who certainly went out in style. In 1970, he won the season opener at the Waterford Speed Bowl, and when the race ended, he simply told his car owner, Billy Simons, that he was hanging up his helmet. I just had the feeling that I'd had enough of it, is how he explains it today. To this day, he has never been back to the Speed Bowl. When I asked him why he had never revisited the place he was so much a part of, and that was so much a part of him, Collins, who has always been the shy, quiet type, said, quote, "I guess I was afraid somebody would pin me down and I'd have to say a few words," unquote. So just like that, he was gone, really gone. And so, in my most curious years, I thought an awful lot about Don Collins. What made him win, I wondered? What made him so good? Like I said, Don Collins, mystery man. Fortunately for me, I've always loved a good mystery, so whenever his name came up in conversation, I found myself asking folks about Don Collins. Mo Guernsey, one of New England's earliest stock car champions, raced against Collins often at the Speed Bowl. Moneybags Mo had been retired for years before I got to know him, but I spent a lot of time listening to him talk about the good old days. Whenever the subject turned to Don Collins, I was all ears. I asked Mo one day what had made that guy so tough. Old Moneybags came back with one word: smooth. Just recently, in preparation for this event, I called a couple of guys who qualify as Don Collins experts. Al Goodrow, who I consider to be as sharp a guy as there is when it comes to the Waterford Speed Bowl, and Bill Slater, who I consider to be as sharp a guy as there is when it comes to just about everything connected with modified racing. Both of them are with us here today. Goodrow, whose modifieds won 4 straight Waterford championships in the early 70s with Dick Dunn, another guy who's here today, at the wheel, was just a kid in the grandstands when he first saw Collins race in 1956. And while he first competed at Thompson in 1948 with a borrowed helmet and a 37 Ford Coupe he bought for $50, and while he made occasional starts at other tracks, including Norwood, Seekonk, Plainville, and Albany, Saratoga, he will forever be linked with that wonderful little shoreline oval on Route 85. In the Speed Bowl's very first year, 1951, young Don Collins, who turned 20 that July, won 7 feature races, and he never stopped winning. In 1960 alone, he captured an astonishing 23 wins there, 17 in the modifieds and 6 in the old non-Ford division. Although keeping accurate records was not a high priority with race organizers in Don's heyday, he recorded at least 100 documented victories at the Speed Bowl, including those 6 from the non-Ford class and 94 in the modifieds. Collins was crowned the modified champion at Waterford in 1955, 57, 60, 63, and 1969. To get a taste for the level of competition at the Bowl during his best years, and maybe to understand just how good this man was, listen to the roll call of Waterford champions between 1955 and 1963. 55, Don Collins. 56, Bill Slater. 57, Don Collins. 58, Red Foot. 59, Bill Slater. 1960, Don Collins. 61, Ted Stack. 62, Dick Beauregard. 63, Don Collins. Pretty good group. John Brower, whose family was involved with the history of that track from the beginning and who authored the book, A Racing History of the New London Waterford Speed Bowl, wrote this, quote, "Collins was the personification of all the qualities that make a good driver. He was good in every car he drove," unquote. And what cars they were. His own coupes, the 100 and the 106, another 106, this one owned by Francis and John Burrell, and as previously mentioned, the famed Simon's 9. And when legendary car owners Bob Viteri and Vic Bombazzi decided to attack the 1960 season on two fronts, taking Slater and the brand new V8 to Norwood, their choice to fill the seat of the second V8 at Waterford was an easy one, Don Collins. He won the track championship that year in the V8, and he won another for the Burrell brothers and another for Billy Simons, and two with himself listed as the car owner. So John Brower's assessment was right on the money. This man truly was good in every car he drove. I've always believed that the health of short track racing is heavily dependent on colorful drivers, on local champions, on Saturday night heroes. It is my high honor to present for induction into the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame a man who was all of those things, a colorful driver, a local champion, and the biggest Saturday night hero there ever was for thousands and thousands of race fans, Mr. Don Collins.
Blessed today. Unfortunately, that's the way it's going to be. I'm not going to be able to. There's quite a few little things that I could come up with and talk about, and I think the more I tried, the worse I'd probably get myself into. So I'm better off to kind of cut it off as much as I can. Unless you can think of something else to help me out here, you know? Get up a little closer here. Come on.
It's like question and answer. How about when you first went to Thompson and tried to sign in?
Yeah.
First race you ever drove?
Well, that was something that would be pretty good probably to talk about because it's going to say that I did start young. Actually, I was 17. I took a car up there, towed the car up, and didn't intend to drive it myself, but I had the thing that was supposed to be ready to race, and I went up to the gate and whatever, you know, to give him the money to get in. I think it was Steve Scambato. He was there, and he says, well, asked me my age, so I told him the truth. I was 17. And well, I guess he just changed that quick, you know, and then I got in, and I ended up, a friend of mine had a helmet there, so I borrowed his helmet. Went out there, and I'm trying out the car, and all of a sudden, you know, somebody come out, and they stopped, because we were just practicing, told me the position that I'm going to be in. And that's how I guess I started. I got into the heat there. And basically, I believe after that, I bought the helmet from the guy, and I still have the helmet. Gave him $25 for it. That's almost as much as I paid for the car. You told him I paid $50, I guess, for the car. So anyway, I got through that little story pretty good, I guess. And there's many others that I could almost think of, but I think it's better off if I don't say too much. I guess probably I'd like to just thank Near and thank everybody here for having me here. And thank you very much.
I think it's appropriate that our next presenter should be here at the Hall of Fame because a lot of us learn the history of racing by reading this man's column every week in the Speedway Scene Championship Trail, when he wouldn't just tell you what was going on at the current time, but he'd also have what was going on 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So not only did you get caught up on what was happening today, but you also got a history lesson with every column. And he's our next presenter, Mr. Phil Smith.
Very true in a part of history. That's one thing that we do not want to forget. We have here in New England probably the greatest legacy ever as far as auto racing goes. We've also had some of the greatest drivers. They've gone on either to Indianapolis or to Florida or the Winston Cup circuit, Nextel Cup, whatever you want to call it, and they've made us proud. We're not here to talk about Winston Cup or anything else today. We're here to talk about Richard Armstrong. Well, first of all, when one mentions Richard Armstrong, the first thing you think of, well, he owned a car that Jeff Bodine won 55 races in 1978. That is very true, and it's an all-time record that was set and probably will never be broken. But Richard Armstrong is not only a car owner, I think his greatest legacy was his foresight back in the 70s of what modified racing should be and how the racer should be treated. Just to step back a little bit, Armstrong began his racing career as a car owner in 1969 when he bought the M2 from Mike Scrivani. And not until I read Bones's book did I know that, Lou Boyd's book rather, that Ollie Silver was actually Dick Armstrong's original choice as a driver. But Ollie, being the free spirit that he was, he wanted to do his own thing and control his own destiny, and he respectfully declined. Well, anyway, Dick hired Freddie Schultz, and in the first year, they won the Norwood Track Championship. Well, in the course of racing at Norwood in 1969, they also raced at Thompson. Stafford was on Friday night, Norwood on Saturday night, Thompson on Sundays. At the time, the racing costs were beginning to escalate somewhat, but the purses weren't. All three tracks were drawing good crowds, and Armstrong, at the urging of some of his peers, got everybody together and formed what was to become the New England Drivers and Owners Club. It would, instead of each individual complaining about this and about that, they could complain in a group and maybe put some muscle behind it. Well, they went to the promoters at Stafford, Thompson, and Norwood to request a purse increase. They were like running for $500 to win at the time. If you finished out of the top three, you lost money. Does that sound familiar to people who race today? But anyway, at the time, a lot of car owners were hurting and they were beginning to fall off. Tires were going up, just like everything else. Well, NEDOC, with Dick Armstrong leading them, approached all three promoters and said, we want more. All three refused. So probably in the history of New England as a group, for the first time, a strike was called. Stafford was shut down, Norwood was shut down, and Thompson was shut down. While they were shut down, Armstrong and his Vice President Bobby V, and I believe Mr. DeSaro, Fred DeSaro Sr., was the secretary, met with these promoters. Well, finally Stafford came around, and then Norwood came around, and Thompson, he just shut down. He said that's it, he was all done for a while. But when things got back to normal, Thompson eventually did come back around, and everybody was back racing again. Well, Armstrong was basically a man of his own means. A lot of people voiced their resentment because of his sometime flamboyancy, and he wasn't afraid to call a spade, what he felt like. And a lot of people were jealous because of the money that he was beginning to spend. Well, if you know the real story behind it, you couldn't really fault the guy for it because he was self-made. Him and his wife started a costume jewelry business in a second-floor apartment up in Massachusetts. And with their hard work, they turned it into a multi-million-dollar business. And when Dick Armstrong decided he liked racing, he put his all into it with his wife and his family behind him. That was his beer money, whatever you want to call it. Well, after the years with Freddie Schultz, he made a couple of trips down to Martinsville, and he took a real liking to this red number 11 that he saw was cleaning house down there. And at the time, that was the ultimate weapon in modified racing. That was the Tant Mitchell Coupe. Well, in the fall of 1971, he bought that car and brought it back home. Hop Harrington drove it for a few races with a limited amount of success. Well, then, the following year, I think I got to see two of the best races I ever saw Armstrong cars run. One of them was a consolation. It was down at Pocono. Hop Harrington had attempted to qualify the car, and it blew up.
Well, then it got rained out. Well, during the week, I don't know how they made the connection, but Dick Armstrong got hooked up with a virtually unknown driver from Seekonk by the name of Ronnie Bouchard. Ronnie Bouchard had never been on a track any bigger than Seekonk. Well, needless to say, they went down to Pocono the following week, and Ronnie Bouchard started dead last in that race, the consolation race. 20 laps later, Ronnie was leading, pulling away. What a show he put on coming up through traffic. Armstrong was on top of the world just from winning a consi. Well, in the feature race, they also started in the rear, and he started coming up through, and he had the unfortunate occurrence of blowing a tire and basically destroyed the car into the first turn. Well, they figured, well, they'd never see Ronnie Bouchard again. He's had enough of him. Well, a few weeks later, Hop Harrington and Dick's brother and a lot of his friends rebuilt that car, and they went to Trenton, and they put Ronnie Bouchard in that car again. Well, this time there was no blown tires. Ronnie Bouchard finished a real strong second that day, right behind Jeff Bodine. Well, Ronnie went his own way, and he got hooked up with Bob Johnson, as you well know, and he went on to stardom and whatever. Well, Dick still had the coupe, and then he had Hoppy build him a Pinto. First with Gene Bergen in it, and a couple of other drivers. And at the same time, Ray Hendrick, who was down south riding the Tant Mitchell Modified, got out of Modifieds and they were just racing sportsmen, so Dick would bring Hendrick up to run his Modified in some special events. Well, at the urging of Hendrick, he gave Dick the idea to put Jeff Bodine in that car. Oh boy, everybody knows what happened after that. There was still a lot of resentment. A lot of people resented it. But I'll tell you, when Bodine was in that Armstrong car, every promoter in this New England area made money. Because half the people came to see him win, and the other half came to see him crash. But no matter what it took, Armstrong had that car there every week. Once 1978 came and went, Bodine decided he wanted to go down south and pursue other things. And Armstrong was kind of tapering off. But then there was another crisis coming up. It was really getting expensive. So he had the idea of maybe it would be a good idea to run just special events for these high-paying modifieds. But nobody wanted to hear it. They did run a few shows here and there, but as far as putting on a touring type of status, NASCAR didn't want to hear it, and the promoters didn't want to give up their weekly fare. Also, at the same time, there was a tire crisis. Tires were getting out of sight. They were burning them up left and right. So Armstrong spearheaded what was to become a track tire at the time. Well, a track tire cost him dearly because of the fact that the Treasury in NEDOC was just about depleted. He funded most of the litigation and everything else that went with it, because there was quite a bit of litigation on it, through his own. But when it was all said and done, if we turn around and we look today, the modifieds, as we know them now, even at the tracks, are on track tires. There is a modified tour. So I think that he did have the foresight. In addition to being a car owner, he had the foresight to look into the future and what he thought would be the best, and it ended up being the best for modified racing. So I think Dick Armstrong is very well deserving of being in this Hall of Fame. And the most important thing that he did, while all this was going on, he kept his family with him all the time. His wife, and his kids, and his brothers. They raced together, and that's how they stayed together. Unfortunately, Dick was diagnosed with cancer, and he passed away. And he's not here with us today to enjoy this. But in his absence, we do have his family here, and I believe his son Mark is going to come up and accept his induction plaque, if you would, please.
We would all like to thank and accept this honor. It's very much an honor. In my father's memory, on behalf, you all met my family, my sister Kim, Diane, my mother Carol, Rick. We'd all also like to thank New England Autos Racing. I'm not sure if it's New England Antique Auto Racing or Auto Racing. And President Alfini, thank you for inviting us. The selection committee, class of 2005 inductees and past Hall of Famers, and also past drivers, Bugsy Stevens, Georgie Summers. Thank you for coming. Very special thanks to George Brockman and also Kyle Oberg for bringing the modifieds. Kyle's, I talked to him for about a half hour a week ago, and he's in love with that car. He's got it in the heated garage, and I couldn't think of anybody better to own it because he absolutely loves it. He'll never sell it, so don't even ask, he said. Talk to him a little bit later, I hope. I didn't get to talk to him yet. I was sitting down last night and I was thinking about what to say or what to write, and I didn't know what to say. I don't want to brag about my father or whatnot, and a lot of people think it's a lot of money or whatnot, but it's a lot of hard work. So I started thinking, and a lot of memories come up. About being a family sport, absolutely. Racing family is probably the best people you're going to meet in your life. You go to a football game, you see fights break out left and right. You go to a racing, and everybody's happy. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. We go to Stafford, me and my sister, we were probably 10, 7. We'd be out in the track. My parents would be in the pits. And they'd come up at the heat. We'd meet at the, going into turn 1 up high. That was our seat every week. We watched the races. Later on, go down to Victory Circle most of the time. Go up to the clubhouse, party, run around like crazy. 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, we'd finally put the chairs together, lay down, take a little nap, or go to sleep. Wake up in our beds the next day like crazy. Actually woke up early afternoon, I think it was. Saturday night, did the same thing. Go to Riverside, see Sunday, go to Thompson. Beautiful memories. I mean, my father worked hard all week long, so you didn't get to see him. You get to see him at the racetrack. You get to see him excel. Do what he loved to do. Just great memories. He had a lot of sayings, a lot of one-liners. One that sticks in my mind, and it's kind of fitting for today. He said, something bad happened. I'd wreck my streetcar or get in a fight with someone. He'd say, Mark, 100 years from now won't make any difference. I said, you know what? You're right. But today is wrong. Because 100 years from now, it might make a difference. We got the Hall of Fame, people walking through that trailer, hopefully a museum by then, and they look up and see Dick Armstrong's name and what he's done in modified racing, what we all have done. I wouldn't trade modified racing for anything. Great people. Thank you very much.
Now, our next presenter, whenever I talk about Dick Berggren, it always seems like I'm talking about 3 or 4 people. He was a great race driver, inducted into the Hall of Fame for, help me out, Lou, sprint cars. Sorry, guess you could throw the red flag on me for that one. Inducted into the Sprint Car Hall of Fame. He was a great promoter. Along with Lou Boyd and Bruce Cohen, he came up with a phenomenon in 1972 known as the Spring Sizzler. As a publisher, he's a giant in that, and Dick Berggren's Speedway Illustrated proves that. And of course, as a commentator, we're going to see him all throughout the month of February. Fox has got a lot of coverage planned for the Daytona 500 and the races surrounding it, and Dick Berggren will be in the pits giving us all the information that we need. So 4 people, but only one is going to come up to the podium, Dr. Dick Berggren.
I don't know, 4 personalities. Does that make me schizophrenic? I think it might. I'm not sure. I was just sort of sitting in the back of the room today and thinking about how much these Hall of Fame dinners have come to mean. Certainly for me personally, to be able to be in this room with people who I have admired for so long and looked up to. Billy Wimble sitting over there, and Eddie West sitting up in the back here, and
Ray Miller, Hall of Fame people. Bugsy's over here. Rainey Charland, God knows, he's probably under a table somewhere. But it is really, really special for us all to be able to get together, and for those of us who have made auto racing our lives to be able to spend some time with the heroes that we watched as we sat in the grandstand. And for me today, to have had an opportunity to meet a new individual who I did watch race a few times, but not a whole lot. Born on May 16th, 1929, as one of 8 children, Sonny Rabideau competed in the most exciting, colorful, and dangerous era of stock car racing in this part of the world. Driving in street clothes without the benefit of any of the safety equipment today's race cars had, beginning in 1952 at the Hinsdale, New Hampshire Speedway, he somehow survived 25 years behind the wheel. If anything, the tracks in Sonny's time were even more evil than the cars. Poorly lighted tracks, darkened, rutted corners. Heavy dust made it hard to find the wall, so hard to find it, in fact, that some drivers missed that they were in the turn and simply drove into it. Worse yet, the walls often broke into pieces when impacted, with wood flying through the air and even flying through the cars. It was more likely to run off the track and into the trees in Keene's first turn than it was to wind up in the front straightaway accepting the winner's trophy. Sonny Rabideau can tell you all about that. He rolled one into the trees in Keene's first turn. To win, as Sonny Rabideau often did, was to be braver than the next guy. All of the good ones who stuck around to win multiple track championships knew people who died driving cars just like theirs on the same tracks they raced on, and too often even in the same events in which they competed. So it took a tough and courageous guy to mash the gas in the face of so many disastrous crashes that were part of this sport's early days. But courage alone wasn't enough. There had to be a willingness to work on the car late at night, and then the next day go out and do a regular job to earn a living. There was a need to be creative with equipment, as much as there was a need to be creative in finding a line around all the ruts in those dirt tracks. It was a time when the driver truly mattered. Sonny Rabideau distinguished himself as one of the greats. It was a tough time to stand out because he raced against near Hall of Famers Art Russo, Rainey Charland, Ernie Gahan, Bugsy Stevens, Don Rounds, Ollie Silva, and Ralph Cusack, as well as others who will surely one day come here to be inducted into this Hall of Fame. So many great names: Pappy Forsythe, George Janowski, Lionel Arell, Jimmy Kohler, Cecil Bosworth, Ed Foley, and Ted Brown finished behind Sonny Rabideau on so many Saturday nights and Sunday afternoons. Sonny's favorite track was the Claremont, New Hampshire Speedway, where he won 6 championships in 1954, 61, 64, 65, 66, and 1970. He also won championships in Vermont. And for those who believe champions should win races, Sonny is a guy you can proudly cheer for. I asked him to bring some of his scrapbooks today, and he did. And their yellow pages are filled page after page after page of newspaper clippings. Sonny Rabideau wins the 3rd in a row. Sonny Rabideau wins again. Sonny Rabideau wins and wins. He won a documented 71 feature events at Claremont alone. 11 more documented features at Fairmont and Rutland. 10 at Monadnock. 11 at Keene. 4 at Brattleboro. All those are documented, and they total 108, but surely there are many more, perhaps twice as many. The list of places where he raced up front includes some of the most competitive tracks in the history of New England stock car racing, and he won at so many of them. Stafford Springs, Keene, Fairmont, Hinsdale, Rhythm Inn, Mallett's Bay, and Rutland, both in Vermont, Lebanon Valley in New York, and others. His schedule was simple: 4 or 5 nights a week he raced. His number 311 is surely one of the most famous of his rides, made that way because of Sonny's adventuresome drives from the back of the pack to the front on dusty, rutted dirt tracks. Together, Sonny Rabideau, the owner of the number 311 Stroker Smith, and that car won a documented 42 features together. No doubt there were many more wins that never made it into the record book that survives to this day. The car was restored by Sonny's great friend Terry Mark, who is here with Sonny today. The car was twice salvaged from oblivion, once from a town dump and once from a dumpster. Today, it's a proud reminder of one of stock car racing's great eras and one of the top drivers from that era. And for that, thank you, Terry Mark. One of Sonny's rides had a body, and I saw this when I was a kid. It had a body that was so full of holes it made a piece of Swiss cheese look like it was solid. Those holes were drilled there to lighten the car, and literally you could see right through it. That was a flathead. Sonny made the transition from cars like that to the high horsepower V8s. And no ride in those V8s was more fearsome than Lionel Arell's DN3, a car I watched as a kid. It had a huge twin carbureted Chrysler engine under the hood that seemed to dwarf the rest of the car. To call the DN3 a cut-down was generous. There was so little to it. Sonny sat over the rear axle, which was connected to the transmission by a drive shaft just 13 inches in length. The DN3 even had a different sound to it. It was fast on the straights, but evil in the corners. And a testimony to Sonny's skill as a driver was the fact that he managed to win in that beast. It was nicknamed the Beast, despite its awful handling. While many racers of his era couldn't keep a family and their racing schedule together at the same time, Sonny Rabideau managed to stick with the love of his life, and she with him, from the day they were married in 1959. For more than 45 years they have been together, which is an accomplishment for anyone to be proud of. But for someone who raced as hard and as often as Sonny did, it's a testimony to both. Wife Beverly is here at his side, as are their two children, Wendy and John. And would the three of you please stand up, because Sonny didn't do this alone. You were all a help. Round of applause for Sonny's family. And the rest of the folks at that table, those are grandchildren of Sonny Rabideau and his wife Beverly. It's too bad more of the tracks Sonny raced at aren't still in business and with halls of fame, because if they were, Sonny would surely be inducted there. More than 20 years ago, he was inducted into the Claremont Speedway Hall of Fame, so this is his second. Today, Sonny continues to work in support of his family, even though at age 75, most of his contemporaries have since retired. He has proven himself as a racer, a family man, a man who deserves to be inducted in the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, Sonny Rabideau.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for showing. I'm not a man that can speak on these things, so it's not going to take very long, I hope. I just wanted to thank all of you who have made this happen. My family and I are very proud, and I personally like to thank Dick for the different things he's done for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I told you it was going to be a fascinating 2 hours, wasn't it? Now the festivities will still go on for a little while after this. We're going to bring our Hall of Famers and our past members up here for pictures, so everybody's invited to talk to our guests and maybe get some autographs, as we're going to be going on for quite a while. So for all of you who decided to spend your Sunday afternoon in January with us, thank you very much for coming. And for Harry Grant, Oscar Ridlin, Red Bolduc, Sam Weisberg, Val LaSure, Andy Santerre, Smokey Botwell, Reno Talonen, Joe Chicky, Dick Armstrong, and Sonny Rabideau, thanks for the memories. Good afternoon, everybody.